This isn't my story, but it's my mom's. Back in 1999, my mom was 17, and she was on a road trip with her aunt and cousin, and they were going from Colorado to El Paso, Texas. And during the drive, they took Highway 54 through New Mexico. Then they made a pit stop in Vaughn, New Mexico, at a All Sups. Once they got back into the car, they passed by a rundown diner. Then there was a light in the road. Then my mom's aunt cut the brakes. Then a little girl appeared. She had on something pink and appeared to have a doll in her hand. As she was crossing the road, due to the light, her face couldn't be seen, but she could see her hair, which was long and brown. She crossed the street from the driver's side to the passenger side, where my mom was. Once she got to the corner of the car, she walked up to the passenger side window, but just stood there. At that instant, my mom closed her eyes and my mom got a bad feeling, and her hair stood up and her blood ran cold. At that point, my mom's aunt couldn't even react until my mom screamed to gun it at my aunt. Her aunt floored it, and her aunt asked to look back, and my mom denied it. Afterwards, my mom opened her eyes after a few minutes and saw that it was 3:03 a.m. So far, ever since then, my mom has looked all over the internet for answers, but nobody has a story similar to her experience. I come from a reservation in South Dakota, and my family loves telling stories from their childhood, so I know all kinds of stories my grandmother told me. She has a lot of good ones, and sometimes strange stories that has happened to her throughout her life. This is one strange story she told me about when she was younger. She had to go to the boarding school with her sister. This was in another town called Rosebud. I'm not sure if the school is still there anymore. When she got there, the nuns at the school were really abusive and liked to mess with my grandma and her sister. One night, her and her sister were sleeping with their other peers in a room lined with beds. It was past midnight, and my grandmother was woken by a noise coming from across the room. She couldn't see anything because it was so dark in the room. So she woke up her sister, and they both laid in their beds in fear of what might happen. Then they start to hear the noise of some sort of animal's paws and nails scraping across the floor as it walked towards their bed. Both of my grandma and her sister were in shock because there were no dogs or any animal allowed in the building. My grandmother thought one of the nuns was just messing around and trying to scare them again. Then my grandmother felt her bed spring lift up, and soon whatever was in the room with all of them was under her bed. My grandmother never told me what happened after that. She looked disturbed when telling the story. Another strange incident happened while they stayed at the school was when all of them were playing together downstairs. My grandma was dared to open this door to the attic that they were not supposed to open. Once my grandmother opened the door, they all heard thumping and then saw a pair of legs bolting down the attic steps. She told me there was no upper body, just a pair of legs running at her. They all started to scream and took off running away from the door and never went near it again. After hearing about the story, she told me about that place. I don't think I'm ever going to allow my children near that school. When I was around 15, maybe 16, I walked into my bedroom and had left my curtains open. There's a patch of green right outside my house with the lamppost next to the path. Before I walked in, I had an urge not to open the door. My dad told me to go to bed. You did not disobey my dad. As much as I was scared to open the door, I knew I'd be in trouble if I didn't. As I opened the door, I realized I had left my curtains open and it was dark now. As I went to go close my curtains, something caught my eye on the wall behind me. I didn't shut the curtains. I turned around and saw a shadow of a woman from her shoulders with curly hair on the wall. I had just been by the window, and no one was out on the green or near the lamppost. I was on the second floor, so there's no way she could have been right outside my window. I walked out, shut my door, shouted at my dad, who must have seen and heard how scared I was. He came and looked at the wall. The shadow was still there. He checked outside the window and went white as he turned to look at me. He trembled and said quietly, "There's no one there." He suddenly shouted at me that I was to stay in my sister's room, whose room was right next to mine, and also a window looking onto the green. She had no shadow. The next day, my dad brought a woman around, and we were told to leave, and she looked at me in concern. As she was leaving, I heard her say, "She will be safer now, but I don't know what else is following her." Even 12 years later, this memory keeps me up at night. It's becoming more intense and affecting my sleep. Can anyone advise what this entity was, and am I safe? Alright, so starting off this story, you probably need some background info. Me and some friends were out camping for some sort of group thing. We were out there for 3 nights, and each night something freaky happened. And even some things happened during the day. So we were out by a fire for the first time, and everyone was wide awake and ready to chill for the long weekend. So we decided to tell ghost stories, because we're dumb. Keep in mind, it's about 9:30 to 10 p.m. currently. We start telling our own ghost stories, but after a while, they get boring, and we go onto Reddit for some ghost stories. We read part 1, but it wasn't scary, so we stopped. And this is the point where I got up and was like, "Hey, look at the thing in the bushes over there." Of course, I was joking, but then people started seeing things moving. And even people who are very down to earth, not just me, I have a very vivid imagination. And we hear noises. Pretty freaked out because it's dark and spooky. We decided to go to bed quickly. But all throughout the night, I hear footsteps and howling. I think the howling was from the young group of kids camping next to us, but it still added to the atmosphere. The winds were blowing strongly that night, and it was cold and no one got much sleep that night. On the second night, it was pretty much the same story as the first night. Just footsteps and howling and occasionally seeing things moving in the darkness. Nothing new happened, but people were just freaked out and worried about things. Now we move on to the third night, which was the freakiest of them all. It starts off the same as the last 2, with people joking about the man in the bushes. And then, of course, people start seeing things and panicking. But now, it's about 10:05 p.m. and we start getting ready for bed. All the girls get up and go to the toilet. And it's just me, my friend, Spencer, and my half-friend, Brandon. Brandon gets up to supposedly go to the toilet, but me and Spencer assume he's going to prank the girls. So the girls come out of the toilet when Brandon is still there. And there was the word "help" written in big letters on one of the poles, or so I was told. The girls all kind of freak out and say that it's Brandon, and walk back to the camp, where one of the girls is really freaked out and starts wanting to go home, wishing they never came to the camp. Both me and Spencer was thinking it was Brandon, but he kept denying it profusely, which was odd, because he always admitted after he pulled a prank, but this time he kept denying it, even to the adults of the camp. This causes Spencer to start thinking Brandon wasn't lying, and then he started freaking out a bit. I had bad anxiety and paranoia, and a very vivid imagination, but I always put everything down to science and logic. I'm the sort of person that always has an explanation for everything, and I start saying, if you were being chased or in danger, would you have the time to write help on a pole? Of course people listen, but they all freak out. Then one of the girls offers to show me the help sign and why they thought it was Brandon. But when we got there, the help sign had completely disappeared. I had absolutely no explanation to this and started to freak out. To calm myself down, I made up a lie like charcoal gets soaked into wood after a certain period of time, even though I knew it was a blatant lie. It was only like 5 minutes later when I went to have a look. We all go to bed, and surprisingly, I slept well. This is now the last day we are at the camp, so we just started packing up. We are told to go clean the toilets, and this is where all the relatively creepy things have been happening. We start sweeping and cleaning out the toilet block, but every cubicle felt like something was in it, and I constantly felt like I was being watched. As we swept, someone threw gum nuts, we're Australian, through the bars, so I go out to yell at the person, but there is no one there. This happens a few times, until I'm outside, and one of my friends yells out that they saw a gum nut get thrown through the window, and I'm only seconds away from the edge, so I sprint around, and nothing is there. For reference, the window, it wasn't really a window, it was some diagonal bars at the top. It was only about 20 centimeters tall, and the nearest gum tree is across the road. This freaks me out, and I go back inside to finish sweeping. My friend had left to go talk to the girls, so I was alone in the bathroom, and when I turned the corner, I saw a distinct shadow figure standing in the corner before walking into one of the cubicles and disappearing. It was my height, about 5'8". It had long, scruffy hair and a blank expression on its face. It walked with a long gait and disappeared as soon as I looked into that cubicle. I left the toilet quickly, but the next time I walked in, with my friend Spencer, the cubicle that the shadow man walked into, its toilet was flushing. Me and Spencer sprinted out, and we never went back in there for the rest of the camp. We left later that day. So that's my story. Do any of you think there was some sort of presence at our camp? Sorry if the story was a bit long. And yes, names have been changed to protect the innocent. I suppose I'll begin with a bit of background information. I'll try not to be too long-winded, but it's quite the experience and worth doing justice, so bear with me. A bit about me. I've had multiple paranormal encounters, once every few years all throughout my life. I am currently 27. Something strange always seems to occur when I at least expect it, which rarely has much to offer in the way of rational explanation. Examples include a typical electrical weirdness only in my presence, inanimate objects moved out of place while alone, multiple instances of UFO phenomenon, dream visitations by deceased relatives, and the one instance I'll share with you all here. This particular experience dates back about 5 years ago and took place on a back road in the Appalachian Mountains of western North Carolina. It was sometime after dark, and an ex and I were driving back to town we lived in at the time, located a couple hours north of Asheville, after visiting family there for the weekend. It was a clear summer night, and there was very little traffic on the country road. The weather was nice, and we had the windows down to feel the breeze. We weren't saying much, just listening to some music or podcast or something. After seeing no one else for at least 10 to 15 minutes, we rounded the corner onto a long straightaway stretch of road, about a mile long, that's visible clear to the next curve in the road. As we rounded the bend, another car's headlights could be seen rounding the opposite corner, coming in our direction with the high beams on bright. Most drivers tend to dim their lights when approaching oncoming traffic. This one did not. This prompted me to flash my lights to try and remind them their brights were on, which I tried multiple times with no avail. At this point, my ex and I were a bit flustered and were commenting on how obnoxiously powerful some cars' headlights can be sometimes. Just ready to pass this person. Just as we came within about 10 yards from passing each other, the oncoming lights shut off completely, and there was nothing there. No car could be seen. Nothing was heard whooshing past us as we passed with the windows down. No taillights were seen in the rearview mirror. Both my ex and I went rigid, and our hair stood on end. She just solemnly cut off the stereo, and we sat in silence for what I felt like was forever, but verifying that the other person had seen it too, and trying to make sense of it. I had a little doubt of the paranormal at this point in my life, but my ex was much more skeptical, even after this happened. A little bit less than she'd been prior. Nothing much out of the ordinary seemed to result from this encounter, at least not that I could directly attribute to it, but it's a vivid memory I think of often. There are other odd happenings I'd be glad to share with anyone who's interested.